Mega Golurk is a pretty insane Pokemon, and it feels like no one's really noticing the thing, so today my plan is to get Buddy to pop off. Its ground ghost typing is pretty solid in being able to avoid things like fake out pressure, and gives us some nice offensive stab. Its stats are super nice with base 159 attack, which is massive, along with solid bulk at 105 in both. One of the really cool parts about Mega Golurk is that it gets the ability Unseen Fist, which allows us to hit through opposing Protect and do 25% of our normal damage. So this was nerfed in Champions, where it straight up used to do 100% damage through Protect, but even with the nerf, I think it's still considerably strong. We're going to pair the thing with Trick Room to allow it to have the best chance at outspeeding most threats, and then we can bop things with Stab 110 power Poltergeist, which is very strong against a lot of the top tier mons right now. We've also got a big 120 power Headlong Rush that nukes everything, and then with Ice Punch coverage, we can basically hit everything for at least neutral, and with its base 159 attack, this thing is an absolute problem. It's also kind of cool and worth noting that we're actually able to outspeed uninvested King Gambit before the Trick Room is active and can get a surprise knockout with Headlong Rush. And then Trick Room goes up and its speed tier is pretty helpful on the other side, being able to outspeed pretty much everything else. Unseen Fist is great for allowing us to pick off Pokemon trying to stay alive with a Protect. Things do not see the fist coming. Overall, Mega Golurk is an incredibly cool and fun Pokemon to use right now, and so it's time to let the people know. So let's get into a quick team breakdown, and then we're going to jump into some matches with the absolute beast. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're busting out the Golurk, and I've got a fun team that I've been kind of experimenting with a bit, changing things around, and I think I've got it to a place that seems pretty fun to use. One thing I will say is Unseen Fist, when they hit it with that nerf, I thought for sure it was almost not even going to be worth it. I think it turns out, and you'll see in the matches today, that bypassing Protect, even with a quarter damage, is pretty nice, especially when Golurk is an extremely hard-hitting attacker right now. And so the plan is going to be, I'll break down a little bit of how the team is designed to work, and then we're going to go ahead and get ourselves into some really interesting games. So before we get too deep, I want to say, hey, if you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button. I've got a ton of fun content planned. We basically try to find a use for just about everything around here, and we have a nice time. Now, looking at the squad, main functionality and kind of primary focus is how can we get Golurk to do as much as possible. So I will say, as a general overview, team is pretty much hard Trick Room, barring I do have a fast Sneasler in the back and potentially Whimsicott, who does perform pretty well if no matter what the conditions are, but I think it's a nice option to have a Sneasler in the back that not only pressures from team preview, but also gives you a kind of late game sweeper option. Now, most of the time we're going to be able to pair Farigiraf with the Trick Room, primary Trick Room setter being Farigiraf, who is just insane right now because of its Armor Tail ability, blocking priority, performs really well against a lot of fake out leads. You can generally, with the Citrus Berry in a bulkier build, be able to get up a Trick Room almost no matter what. It also has potential Helping Hand to just increase damage from things like Golurk. While there are matchups where you could just lead Golurk with the Farigiraf and Protect and get your Trick Room up, a lot of the time what I find is that people will lead with there's Milotic everywhere. Bulky water types are a big problem, and so I tossed minimum speed Rotom Wash on the squad, which I think works really well as an early slow Volt Switch pivot. You can pair that with the Farigiraf, get off a big Volt Switch, not only with Magnet Boost just to be able to get good damage, but then you're able to bring in Golurk freely as Trick Room gets set up. So I think that's something that's really important. In the back, we've also got the Torkoal, who is just insane under Trick Room with Eruptions, but it is also able to reset Weather into Sun against a lot of rain teams. Not a lot to say about Torkoal, other than that it's a delete button with Eruption. It also does put a lot of pressure just from team preview from opponents. Next, looking at it, I have this Whimsicott, who is Focus Sash to guarantee a secondary potential Trick Room. Now, also just having a Prankster Encore is diabolical in this meta, being able to just Encore late game mons into Protect. Basically just kind of negates an entire side of their field. If you can bring this thing in late, be able to get an Encore off, potentially reset Trick Room for our main sweepers being the Golurk and the Torkoal. And then of course we have the fast Sneasler over there, who does work really well as a secondary lead option with Farigiraf. If you can get an early fake out, open up the door for Frig to just guarantee I don't just get doubled. You do find yourself then at a spot where you will need to just hard switch the Sneasler out if you don't just get dealt with early. But overall, I think that Sneasler is a really good bring against teams that, you know, will have a late game Incineroar where we can outpace with fake out, and then it's just really nice to have that close combat. So without any further ado, let's go ahead, let's jump into some games, and we're gonna get this boy Golurk to go ahead and punch some stuff. So as we take a look at the team matchup here, we're seeing a Mega Dragonite. There is some very scary things like Rain with the Pelipper, along with Basculegion is very scary. They also have an Orthworm for potential, you know, some Shed Tails. Overall, since I'm seeing kind of just some rain, it's probably going to be a hurricane-focused Mega Dragonite. I decided they might just go Pelipper along with something like a Basculegion. They have, you know, whenever I'm seeing some water types, I'm going to throw Rotom on, pair that lead with the Farigiraf. And that's just because slow Volt Switch is really nice to be able to get Golurk in safely while also setting up a Trick Room. Also, main things I try to focus on here, not seeing any big kind of dark type damage. It feels like Farigiraf can't really get doubled into not being able to set up the Trick Room. So as I throw the Torkoal in the back as the 4th, I feel like I'll probably be able to function with just the Farigiraf as the Trick Room setter. But if I can get some momentum early and then get Golurk in under Trick Room, there's not a whole lot that scares our big Iron Giant, who's not actually Iron. However, they do have the Orthworm that I could not Headlong Rush, so for that reason, we're throwing Torkoal back there. Also going to be really good to just reset the rain into Sun instead. And so let's jump into the game. Okay, so we are seeing a Basculegion lead, which was kind of expected, but then they've got the Orthworm. And I'm not gonna lie, Orthworm it does scare me. If they can get something safely, you know, behind that substitute, which is I imagine what this thing wants to do, I am frightened. However, it feels like Basculegion is pretty safe. I don't think they can really double into the Farigiraf and remove the Trick Room here, so I'm obviously just gonna Volt Switch into the Basculegion, which, important to note, that does get a knockout if it's not full bulk on the thing. And so that's going to go ahead and pair that with the Trick Room. And then plan is essentially getting the Golurk, who really isn't threatened by anything that the Orthworm can click necessarily. So it's almost a stalemate matchup. But while it feels really good that Rotom is essentially safe, they do go for the Wave Crash into the Farigiraf slot, which is fine. We take that nicely. It does give us a little bit of lunch that brings us above half. And here's where the Volt Switch is such an easy click with the Rotom. It's going to take out the Basculegion, which is amazing. And that is also going to basically, we get to see what the Orthworm wants to click. But more of the story is Trick Room is going to get set up as there's nothing it can do to take care of Farigiraf. And then it's time to go into the big boy. We're going to bring in one of my personal favorite new Megas. I do consider going into Torkoal here just because that Orthworm's a problem. However, it seems like in the long run, I want to keep Torkoal in the back. If they brought Basculegion, that probably means that they've got the Pelipper. So they do actually end up clicking Body Press here into the Farig. So they did want to try to double and remove the Trick Room, but not today, says the Citrus Berry. Now the room is all twisted up in terms of dimensions. And also Buddy's face is about to get all twisted up in terms of rearranging the features via Poltergeist on stuff. So they do end up bringing in Dragonite on the Revenge Switch in here. And this feels kind of fine. I don't know necessarily what this thing wants to click against Golurk. But what I do know is I'm just going to Helping Hand Ice Punch here. It's probably going to Mega on this slot, and it does maintain its multi-scale ability. So while it's working with full bulk, I am mildly afraid of I'm not going to be able to knock it out here, probably even with the Helping Hand Ice Punch. But I also just want to kind of see how much damage it's going to do. I'm not going to lie. If it protects, it'd also be kind of fun to just get some damage through that. And then next turn it gets knocked out. I go ahead, activate my Mega first because I am under Trick Room. I am faster. They put the crazy ass wings on the dome. I'm still not necessarily super worried about what Orthworm's going to click here. I think I can live a Draco Meteor here, but Helping Hand comes through. We turn the old Knuckle Sandwich Fist into a block of ice, little ice sandwich for that boy. While it does not quite knock it out, we get it down to 22, which is super manageable. And also, unfortunately for them, the ice sandwich was too crazy. It does freeze, which is not even something I considered. But we would have been able to live a Draco Meteor, which is important. And Orthworm is over here going for an Iron Defense. I do not really care about an Iron Defense just because of the fact that, again, I have Torkoal in the back and that thing can pretty much take care of it. If it gets too many of those boosts and then is able to outspeed Torkoal if Trick Room is gone, that could be a little bit scary. But for now, my plan is basically just to leave the Orthworm chilling. Now, they're going to swap out the Dragonite. They do bring in the Pelipper for the rain. Now, as I go for the Hyper Voice here, it is going to chip the Pelipper. It pretty much do nothing to the Orthworm, but while Farigiraf doesn't have a great reason to stay in, I figured I don't really want to hard switch in Torkoal, obviously. So at this point, the Orthworm continues to Iron Defense. Ice Punch, not quite enough to take care of the Pelipper, but the fun part is they probably think that they can protect the Pelipper here and grab a free turn. Now, important note about this team. If you are predicting a Protect, you cannot click Poltergeist. That is not a physical contact move, which is wildly unfortunate. So they are going to protect the Pelipper, which is very satisfying. I really wanted to see this come into play here because, well, it is going to bypass the Hyper Voice. They're like, I'm safe for now, but not for long, baby. These fists are unseen as hell. You do not even see the fist coming. So Hyper Voice just gets some chip on Orthworm. Ice Punch is going to be able to finish through the Protect, which is quite satisfying. Now that takes care of Pelipper, which makes me feel a whole lot more safe in that now Torkoal is going to be able to maintain its Sun. And also, perfectly kind of on schedule, they do go for the body press there, which takes care of Farigiraf, which actually kind of ends up being what I needed here, in that now, while the Rotom was going to be insurance to be able to deal with the Orthworm if need be, I can actually just get the free switch into Torkoal. Rain is not going to last long, and we just immediately threaten Orthworm, and honestly, Torkoal is going to be able to be the fastest mon on the field here as Dragonite comes in, who is frozen. Now, important note, Frozen has been significantly nerfed in that you most of the time are going to thaw out turn 1, but Torkoal is feeling generous, and I feel like, you know what, I'm actually just going to help you out with that thaw and just hit you with an eruption. I think the optimal play actually would have been to go for Ice Punch here with Golurk into Dragonite just in case they do thaw and protect. But we do still have, the Trick Room is still up, so Torkoal is going to come through. They don't try for the protect. That is just going to wipe the both of them. Eruption Torkoal is just truly one of the most satisfying things to have. Now, luckily, that's going to take care of both of them. The Orthworm's defensive boost did not matter. Funniest part is, as the Dragonite goes down, the game is also like, and it thawed out. So yeah, you know, he's thawed out in death, so you can enjoy that. Now, that was just an interesting kind of quick match there where Golurk was able to grab a knockout through or protect. But if you can get Trick Room up safely, that just goes to show that this team is very strong and actually really fun to work with. So for that reason, we're going to go ahead and jump into game number 2 because we've still got some work to do, baby. Now, looking at what we're working with here, first of all, one of the biggest things that is able to stop this team is things like potentially non-prankster taunt, being like if this Talonflame is able to taunt on Farigiraf and stop my Trick Room immediately, we're in big trouble. For that reason, I'm also going to throw in Whimsicott in the back as I lead Golurk just with that Farigiraf in hopes that we can just kind of put the pressure on early. I am worried about that, but also they have Gardevoir. They've also got the Sinistra, who can potentially click Trick Room themselves and basically just reverse Trick Room. If you're unfamiliar, you can just click Trick Room after it's already up and it just turns it off. So maintaining Trick Room is a bit tricky, but the overall plan is that we're just going to start with the GOAT and just see if we can get the offense going immediately. While I do figure they're probably going to go with the Talonflame lead, they also have either Mega Gardevoir or the Mega Feraligatr. Feeling like it's probably going to be Feraligatr here just to kind of have its best matchup against, you know, the pretty much guaranteed Mega Golurk. So this turns out to be a really cool match against a pretty scary squad, and let's get into it. Okay, so there's some really cool kind of in-depth stuff going on with this lead. So as they go with the Gambit and the Talonflame, Talonflame makes me feel like I'm afraid of a taunt. This almost makes me want to go Mental Herb Farigiraf, but the Citrus Berry is just too useful. But the interaction with the King Gambit is super interesting with the Golurk. Now, most of the time is I'm going to Trick Room here with the Farigiraf and then try to protect the Golurk. While I am potentially worried about maybe even Talonflame going Will-O-Wisp into the Golurk slot, one of the really fun parts is this Golurk is actually designed to be able to outspeed King Gambit while Trick Room is not up. And that works nicely for a turn 1 here, as long as this thing has no speed investment. Now, they do swap out the Talonflame, which is relief, but as they bring in the Sinistra, this should be mostly fine because as we activate the Mega, we know that the Trick Room is going to be the last thing to set up. And also, knowing that I can even just live a Sucker Punch if that's what they go for here, the plan is to just go Headlong Rush immediately. We are able to get the outspeed by 3 points against the King Gambit, which is going to immediately just wipe the board of one of the scariest things to both Farigiraf and the Golurk. And hell yeah, that immediately starts us off with a nice little 4-3. And that feels pretty good because also now as Farigiraf sets up the Trick Room, while Golurk used up its turn being fast there, now it also is just going to be faster than everything they've got under Trick Room. So very satisfying turn 1 because people will often lead off with Gambit just to try to threaten the Farigiraf, but not if it gets blown up first. So on the free switch, they decide to bring in the Feraligatr. Now, Mega Gator is a bit of a problem in that, you know, I'm kind of at a spot here where Golurk needs to focus into Sinistra, but then also Farigiraf just doesn't really pressure a Mega Feraligatr. So I'm feeling like they probably are going to go ahead and just go Liquidation into this Golurk slot, which does worry me a bit. Now, for that reason, what I'm actually going to end up doing here is just predicting them to just go as much damage into Golurk as possible with Water Stab. I'm actually going to switch Farigiraf into Torkoal, and that's just to set up the Sun and then reduce the damage from a potential Liquidation to hopefully be able to live that. And then I'm going to actually focus into that Feraligatr slot with the Poltergeist. So Torkoal comes in, I set up some Sun, but it's also really good to just be able to freely get up Torkoal here, just knowing that next turn I have a really fast threatening offense. So they go for the Mega, they put the toilet lid on the dome, and as I go ahead and move first because of Trick Room, I can hit it with the Poltergeist. And while I know it's not quite going to knock it out, I just figured that this was my safest bet, in that if it was able to live the Hyper Voice paired with that, I would be also pretty scared. But They end up going for the Matcha Gotcha. Nearly knocks out Golurk with a crit there, which is scary as hell. Knocks me down to 11. And then I realized, yep, I put myself in a spot where basically they focus into that Golurk slot anyway, and it takes me out. So, luckily, though, they actually double edge into the Farigiraf slot, which now is Torkoal, and we kind of dodged a bit of a bullet there. So my plan wasn't really bulletproof, and then I really just thought that Sinistcha was maybe gonna like protect or just go for like a Rage Powder or something like that, but ended up being the Matcha Gotcha, which was very scary. But we're still positioned really well here in that basically we get a double knockout if things... Honestly, what I'm worried about actually could potentially be an Aqua Jet from the Feraligatr. I probably should have gone Farigiraf here to try to block that if they do have it. But as they actually switch out the Sinistcha, they're going to bring in the Talonflame, and the Feraligatr goes for the Protect. Now this is actually the turn that I forgot that Poltergeist does not make contact, and this is confusing. Now Heat Wave is still going to be just great chip here on the Talonflame, potentially breaking a Focus Sash, nearly get it to half, but then I was like, I got this Gator with the Poltergeist, but it just gets protected, and I was like, how the hell does Poltergeist not make contact? Damn it, that is annoying. I could have clicked Headlong Rush there and basically had the knockout, but instead I paid the price that Unseen Fist are pretty seen if you're not actually making contact. So that is a misplay on my end, a couple of them this match. But most important thing is that we've still got Trick Room up, and Talonflame also doesn't have any priority with Gale Wings having taken damage there. So my thought process is if this Gator had Aqua Jet, it would have probably used it the turn prior. So I feel safe in that I don't need to bring in Armor Tail Farigiraf. As I go for the Heat Wave here, they actually swap Talonflame back into the Sinistcha, who is going to be able to activate some Hospitality, heal up the Gator pretty significantly, nearly to half, which is scary. And it actually does go for the Aqua Jet. They had the priority the whole time. So Buddy was holding on to it, he bluffed, and I fell for it. It would have been very satisfying to swap Torkoal into the Farig there, especially since I Earth Power into the Feraligatr slot just to knock it out, guaranteed. But now we've got a little bit of work cut out for us, and I'm honestly mildly afraid. So as much as I want to go into Whimsicott here and then Prankster Encore that Gator into Aqua Jet and then try to get in for Farigiraf to be able to block it with Armor Tail, I figure, you know what, I'm actually just best off going ahead, bringing in the Farigiraf. They cannot Aqua Jet because now the Armor Tail is out. And so Torkoal is safe, and we need to basically make the most out of this Trick Room turn here. So with one turn left on the Trick Room, it is pretty important that I make the best move possible. Protects are likely going to happen here. I imagine Feraligatr is going to be able to get that off. They swap Sinistcha out again. They want to continue to get Hospitality on this damn thing. But as they bring in the Talonflame, I actually Helping Hand into the Heat Wave here because I figure that'll easily be enough to knock out the Gator if it doesn't protect, but of course it does. But what's fine is that since we saw the damage from a non-Helping Handed Heat Wave earlier, this is going to be enough to knock out Talonflame. But the thing becomes now, as the flame goes down, they've got 2 Mons left. So Sinistcha is going to be able to come in Hospitality again onto this Gator, who is just getting bandaged the hell up today by some tea. But the dimensions are now going to return to normal. So this late game is going to be a bit of a tricky one. While Torkoal is kind of a sitting duck at this point, I imagine their best bet is going to be to try to just double into this Farigiraf slot to stop the Trick Room getting set up a second time, which most of the time, look, if you can set up 2 Trick Rooms, this team can generally find positions to win. So one thing is, I'm still actually going to go ahead and click Heat Wave here on the Torkoal rather than Protect. And that's just because I feel like their best bet is going to have to double into the Farigiraf slot. And I figure, they want the biggest damage possible. So I'm thinking they're probably going to Dragonize Double Edge into this Farig slot. One thing is, though, they have not seen my 4th slot being Whimsicott. And so what my plan is to actually do, I'm going to switch Farigiraf into the Whimsicott, who, if I can bait the Dragon move, that'll be very satisfying. And look at this, Feraligatr actually goes Aqua Jet into the Torkoal. So I don't know if they just didn't care, they wanted to just click it in front of the Armor Tail anyway, or they predicted the switch. Regardless, they make a pretty interesting move there that takes care of Torkoal right before it was about to knock out the Sinistcha. So that makes things a little bit interesting. And as they do go for the Matcha Gotcha, which burns the Whimsicott, which doesn't necessarily matter, I do feel like I've now got one last trick under my sleeve. And that while that Aqua Jet paid off for them really well on that last turn, now it's going to come back to bite them because I've got the monsters left. I can go back to Farigiraf, who with Armor Tail, you already know it's about to go down. I'm going to go ahead and essentially I'm going to Twin Beam into the Sinistcha because I really, really need damage onto this thing. But also, I can then Encore the Feraligatr. Prankster's going to for sure go first. And honestly, as they go for the Rage Powder, I was scared until I remembered that grass types are not affected by Rage Powder, which is quite satisfying. I encore the Feraligatr into the Aqua Jet, which is about the most satisfying thing ever, because now this guy is forced to use a priority move in front of a guy who just entirely blocks priority, and that is what we love to see there. So I can then Twin Beam to just get as much damage as possible into Sinistra. Twin Beam is on this Frig set just essentially to be able to bypass like Focus Sash Sneasler and things like that. Just Focus Sashes in general works well against Venusaurs, but now we've got this Feraligatr basically at a point where it can't do anything. It's stuck into the Aqua Jet. I could even encore the Sinistra into the Rage Powder here, but I figure actually just the combination of a Moonblast and a Tail Twin Beam should be able to take care of the thing. So once again, this Feraligatr has just been dunked on to where it cannot Aqua Jet. It's basically forced to click A. Moonblast comes through, brings it down to 19, and I'm like, nice, this is fine. But of course, it's got a damn Citrus Berry, which gets it healthy enough to the point where after it heals from this Machagacha, the Twin Beam is not going to kill it. Now, luckily, Whimsicott, while I am burnt and taking some chip here, I'm safe enough to the point where, you know, my Moonblast is the best way to do damage to it, and I'm safe enough to where I'm not super worried about that damage. But that just goes to show I probably should have played the safest bet being the Encore there, just to guarantee that this thing's stuck into Rage Powder and the Gator's over there stuck into Aqua Jet, and a couple Encored fellas would have been actually kind of funny, but I really just did not even think about the Citrus Berry, but it's fine. Now, this turn should be hopefully able to do it in that, you know, you ain't got no more Citrus Berry. And also, I'm sick and tired of your hospitality. No more of that. Another Aqua Jet. This is very funny. We're just watching this thing just spam Aqua Jet. We get off the Moonblast. That is going to take care of the Sinistra. And now all we got to do is basically just Moonblast the Gator one more time. Even if the Encore runs out, I basically can I can finish it. I can Encore it again just to be mean about it. Twin Beam actually does not quite finish it out. Of course, actually would have just done the game in right there. But it's fine. It ends its Encore, which is probably like, oh, thank God, I can click something other than Aqua Jet. But nope, you will be clicking that again, buddy, because Prankster Encore is rude as hell. But this is a good one to kind of just showcase that Whimsicott is pretty valuable if brought in the back for this exact reason. The late game protects or late game priority in front of the Frig is gonna cost you. So I go for this last Encore just to guarantee that for whatever reason this thing doesn't have the ability to just delete us both somehow. And so yeah, one last Aqua Jet for the road. Armor Tail working double time today is hilarious, and a Hyper Voice is going to be able to finish off the Gator. And that is the end of that game, which I thought was a super interesting one where, you know, there was a lot that went right, and you know, we luckily were able to come out on top. So that was a goofy ass game. As I've got a couple more matches here for you, I want to say I really appreciate you guys sticking with me here. A little bit of a content switch up, but I'm having a fun time with it. Hopefully you guys are vibing with it as well. But looking at the team matchup here, we see Mega Meganium, which is frightening. I mean, it could be Mega Tyranitar, potentially Excadrill, probably not Drill. But the Sand squad frightens me. Meganium and Sand is pretty damn good. I am, for that reason, going to bring the Torkoal, but Trick Room might be a little bit difficult to set up here. However, I have a little bit of a plan on the turn one. I'm actually going to lead off Whimsicott along with Golurk. And I see the Sneasler, and I just figure for sure they're probably going to try to fake out with the Sneasler. But one thing that I think is a fun kind of dynamic of this team is that you can actually keep Frigoraph in the back and then switch it in on a turn where you predict their priority to just immediately stop it in its tracks. So I think that would be kind of fun. But I'm also going to put some pressure early with the Golurk. And that's just because, you know, I can take pretty much one single attack from things like a Tyranitar, and then I can basically in return knock it out with a Headlong Rush, and then basically protect and try to get Trick Room up after that. So that's the plan. Let's go ahead and see how she goes. Okay, so they actually end up leading off with the Heliolisk Sneasler. I'm confused about what Heliolisk is about to bust out, but I've got the Whimsicott. They do have the Sneasler as expected. And as much as they could just Dire Claw, I really feel like they're going to try to break a Sash here with a Fake Out. And so for that reason, I'm going to go ahead, swap out into Farigiraf, and then I'm also going to Headlong Rush just right into this Sneasler. If it's not Focus Sash, which I feel like on this team it's probably not, considering they have Sand, it just dies turn one, and then with Sneasler gone, that's going to be nice. So again, Heliolisk kind of scares me in that I don't know what it's going to click, but the plan remains. We're going to try to get an Armor Tail in front of a Fake Out, which would be fun. And then also, I'm not super threatened to be able to set up the Trick Room next turn. So we go ahead and bust out the Mega. One of the funny parts about Mega Golurk is that when he gets these crazy ass things on his shoulders, it just like entirely blocks the view of the opponents over there, which I think is funny. Now, Heliolisk goes for a Glare. Into the ground type is going to be able to paralyze me, which is annoying. and a little bit more annoying than I thought. Now, they do go for the Dire Claw, no fake out. Makes sense. Honestly, probably shouldn't have even done it, but I get fully paralyzed on the Golurk turn, and now I'm effectively like, damn it, they kind of got me there, because the damage on the Frigraph makes me believe that if they double into this slot, I'm probably dead, and I need that Trick Room up. Now, as they go for the Volt Switch, does knock me down into Citrus Berry range. After this heal, I am, relatively healthy, but it feels like a close combat probably finishes me. But also, if I don't get paralyzed here, a Headlong Rush just finishes the Sneasler. So it kind of feels like a decent trade-off, especially considering I have the Whimsicott in the back to have a secondary Trick Room option. Now, they do close combat into the Frig, which is annoying. And so you know what? That turn 1 did not necessarily go how I expected it to, and I probably should have just let it ride with the Whimsicott there. But it's fine. Sneasler gets a little bit of White Herb, and they're like, wow, thank God my defenses are nice. I break through the para. Your defenses don't matter when a Headlong Rush comes through from the goat. That is going to take care of Sneasler. And so, look, they brought in the Meganium, which is a bit frightening. It threatens, it threatens Golurk with the Solar Beam. It threatens Whimsicott with a Weather Ball. On the empty switch, though, I'm going to have to go back into the Whimsicott, and I need this Trick Room up if I want to have any sort of success here. So we bring in the Cotton, and they're actually going to reveal their fourth is going to be Tyranitar. So Sandstream is going to be a bit unfortunate for my Focus Sash, just meaning if they do Weather Ball into this slot, I will just go down to that on the next turn, but I should be able to get Trick Room up if they don't double into Whimsicott here. Now, I feel like I have to protect into Golurk, because if they also just double Golurk here, that's going to be very scary, and then I don't have anything to do to this Tyranitar. So my hope is that they try to knock off or go for something like that into the Golurk, and I can catch them with a Protect, because even if this Meganium attacks into the Whimsicott, we should be fine. So this is a pretty important turn on how this plays out. So I get off my Protect, which is great. Most importantly, they go for the Weather Ball here into the Whimsicott. So while I will live it with my Sash, life is temporary. And I am hoping that they target it into the Golurk here, because, at least the Sandstorm activates at the end of the turn. Now, they do knock off into Golurk. So I'm like, oh, hell yeah, we are in business. We've never been so back, because now as the Trick Room comes out, just like that, we've gotten ourselves immediately on the offensive to where now it's feeling like the game is swung into my favor. While Whimsicott does just go down to that sand, annoyingly enough, for that late game Trick Room, it's like we struggled to get Trick Room up in this match, but we got it when it mattered, because now as my final mon is going to be the Torkoal, I'm now in a position where Torkoal, we first of all turn off that ugly ass sand, we turn it into a nice Sunshine, and an Eruption is for sure going to be the fastest thing on the field. It immediately knocks out a Meganium. A Headlong Rush also knocks out a Tyranitar, and then they have a Heliolisk in the back. So I'm like, this should be fine. T-Tar is going to go for the Protect, which is kind of funny. I've actually gotten more Unseen Fists to activate than I thought I would. They actually double Protect. They're like, hey, if I can stall out this turn of Trick Room, that'll be a problem for later. But Headlong Rush goes through the Protect, gets a nice little 30% on the T-Tar there just for free. And, it's also just satisfying to see Unseen Fist do something. So Eruption obviously doesn't matter. They're just going to double Protect here. But again, next turn, it's basically kind of inevitable death, because my Turtle and my Giant are absolute BFFs, and they work pretty well together. I can go for that Eruption just to guarantee that the Meganium, for sure, I don't think there's a way it's living it, especially with the sun up. And then I'm also just going to, again, Headlong Rush without a chance to miss. We obviously click a Headlong Rush. That is going to take care of freaking Reptar over there, which is quite satisfying. It's also quite satisfying we've been able to break through these paras. I thought if I got parried on that turn, that could have been the end of the game. Unfortunately, though, for them, we break through it. The para chance actually got reduced to 12.5% as opposed to the 25 it once was. So we come out on top there. Thank God for no para. Eruption is going to delete the Meganium, which is very satisfying. Now with the final mon being the Heliolisk, they are just going to head out. So, we did get lucky with the para turns there, but thank God. So Golurk on top, baby. One of the most fun Pokemon to use. And that's going to bring us into one final match here. And we're going to see if we can just squeeze any extra value out of our Unseen Fist fella. Okay, so as we're looking at this matchup, one thing I'm thinking, there's 3 different Mega options here that could be scary. So Mega Aggron, I feel like, is probably not coming in a game where I could just go Torkoal. I'm expecting probably Mega Kangaskhan. Other than that, they have the option for the Mega Glamora. Regardless, I'm actually going to end up leading off with the Whimsicott paired with the Sneasler here. And that's because I feel like they're probably going to lead Kangaskhan, who might want to try to get a fake out. If so, I could potentially switch into the Frigoraph and block that. But also my own Sneasler being able to, get a quicker fake out and then just threaten things with a close combat feels pretty good. And then Whimsicott is going to be able to almost guarantee the Trick Room setup unless we get doubled. Then in the back, I'm going to also throw on the Farigiraf, who just feels nice against the Glimmora, which is, if that ends up coming, that'll be good, but also a secondary Trick Room setter for our absolute lad in the back being the Golurk. So this one is hard to prep for when there's just so many different things that it feels like they could do, but let's jump into it. Okay, so the turn one ends up being entirely what I had not expected. They're actually going to go Armarouge paired with the Serena. Now, Serena is Queenly Majesty ability, able to block priority, so that's something that I need to be afraid of. I cannot really click a fake out, but other than that, I don't know exactly what wants to happen here. I do kind of fear that the Serena might triple axle into the Whimsicott slot, and for that reason, I consider switching into the Farigiraf, but instead what I do is I actually swap out the Sneasler into Farigiraf. While I could potentially just go for the Dire Claw into their Serena, I feel like conserving that thing in the back for fake outs when the Serena's not around might be better. And plus, I kind of thought maybe they switch out the Serena. No, turns out they actually just go Zen Headbutt into the Sneasler slot. And as I do get up my Whimsicott Trick Room, I noticed that mine goes first. And so what's weird about that is that means that now their Armarouge also clicked Trick Room, which is unfortunate. You know, it immediately turns on Trick Room and then turns it right back off. And that is not ideal. So now I'm like, okay, they didn't triple axle into this Whimsicott last time. Do I try to just set it up again? Problem is just I don't threaten with enough offense with just the Farigiraf out on the field, so I've gotten myself into a bit of an awkward position. Now, I decide Whimsicott being on the field almost does nothing here, really. I'm just in danger of like a Heat Wave or whatever this Armarouge wants to click, so I'm going to save the Whimsicott. At least it'll maintain that sash for later on, and the best thing I can really do is just go into Sneasler. Now, I don't want to necessarily Trick Room again because they could just turn it off, but also it's in my best interest to just keep Sneasler fast at this point. So I decided to then just target into the Serena slot, just trying to get some type of chip on that thing. But they actually end up swapping into Gallade, which is interesting to see the third being Gallade because I don't know really what this thing wants to do unless this thing's the Mega. I didn't even mention that. I do kind of did not expect it to be the Mega, but Heat Wave comes through from the Armarouge. I am barely able to live a crit with Sneasler, which is, thank God. But it avoids the Farigiraf. So it's like they get a crit on one, miss the other, so that feels fine. Farigiraf stays healthy. Get some chip there onto the Gallade, which is nice. Basically just trying to put things in range for Golurk later on is kind of what I'm working toward here. So at this point, Sneasler's going to be the fastest mon on the field. A fake out feels obvious that they could just go back into the Serena there, but then that's going to waste one of their turns. I'm still going to click fake out into the Armarouge. And then, you know what? I'm just going to set it back up the Trick Room. I need to try to get that up. And if they don't turn it back off here with the Armarouge, which I don't think they're going to click it here because it's a risky maneuver trying to predict when I'm going to Trick Room, because if they just end up setting it up for me, that ends up just hurting them worse in the long run. So as they do actually end up swapping here, they bring back into Serena. So it is going to block that fake out, which is unfortunate. Queenly Majesty is a funny ability in a world where nobody really remembers that thing even has it. Now, Heat Wave does come through. Farigiraf somehow dodges it again, which is sick, but then Sneasler just dies to the Heat Wave. So not necessarily the end of the world, however, and it feels like this is a beneficial turn because now Trick Room goes up and we are officially in business. So the obvious plan now is to go Golurk. While we do have a huge amount of offense that we're threatening on the field, main thing is I'm kind of afraid though because of the fact that if I target into the Armarouge here, they can essentially then get a big drop kick off onto Golurk, which I think I can live at least one of them. But we just know that I don't have any damage there on Serena. So I figure my best bet, probably Poltergeist into Armarouge, and then I'm actually going to just pair that with a Hyper Voice just to cover for a Focus Sash if Young Shoulder Pads has got it here. Also do some damage on the Serena. So that's the game plan. If they protect, they still take a lot from a Headlong Rush here, but the moral of the story is they cannot really turn off my Trick Room this turn, guaranteed. So we got a big ass Band-Aid on our chest. That's why buddy's name is Band-Aid. We go for the Mega, which I do like the look of Mega Golurk. You got to admit that this thing is pretty sweet. So fastest mon on the field is going to be the Hyper Voice here, which is great. Going to get some damage on both. Most importantly, break a Focus Sash. A Poltergeist does connect. Thank God. It actually turns out to be Citrus Berry here on the Armarouge. So, you know, that's kind of nice. Bash his face in. There's now berry juice everywhere, and that's a dead Armarouge. So that does leave me vulnerable, though, to a drop kick from Serena. I'm like, do I live this? I do. Luckily, I live it with 53. So that is clutch. And now it does drop my attack, which actually is kind of the biggest unfortunate part about that whole interaction. But the main thing is we have Trick Room up, and we at least have one more turn here where Golurk is going to stay alive and get something, some type of value. So Their final ends up being Glamora. So it feels like I was correct in that their mega is going to be the Mega Glamora. And that's kind of the main thing why we wanted to keep around freaking Farigiraf. So thing about Glamora is it can definitely just click a spiky shield here. And the problem with the spiky shield is that, you know, then it's not going to stay in range to where a twin beam can finish it. But Golurk with Unseen Fist is way more clutch than I thought it was going to be. They nerfed the hell out of Unseen Fist, and you do feel the difference, but it's still pretty damn strong because here's the deal. I'm going to headlong rush into the Glamora slot, and then I decided to twin beam into Serena because I do still need some damage on this Serena, but I do fully expect that this Glamora is going to try to protect this turn. Now, this is going to leave Golurk open to a drop kick to go down from the Serena, but it's fine. I really need to get this damage. They do Spiky Shield on this turn, and I'm like, Unseen Fist works on Spiky Shield too, right? It should. Trick Room goes first because the Farig is the slowest mon, and here is where basically the game is either won or lost. And if that, luckily, I click the headlong rush, it goes through the protect, and that is so effective that it still at a quarter damage is going to do nearly half. And that makes me feel a whole lot better that now it's actually going to be in range for a twin beam to take care of it. So I get hurt there. That's also at -1 attack, by the way. They do finish off the band-aid with a drop kick. A little kick to the chest definitely knocks the wind out of you and knocks out the Golurk, but it's fine in that just the fact that that Unseen Fist put this thing in range to where Farig can deal with it, I feel a ton better. Because final mon in the back is Whimsicott, who is also Focus Sash. So with Trick Room up, funny part is this Whimsicott's actually trained to be slow. And so depending on if this Serena's got speed, I know that it's going to outspeed Glamora under Trick Room, but kind of depends. I feel like this Serena's probably fast. I'm going to click Moonblast into the Serena slot. All I then got to do is connect on a twin beam on the Glamora, which we got just enough chip to hopefully be able to knock it out with this twin beam. And then, you know, we do still have Sash intact with the Cotton Boy. So the twin beam comes out. Farigiraf is going to be able to come in clutch because look at that, just enough damage thanks to that Unseen Fist hit. And that is going to take care of the Glamora, which is absolutely amazing. And that now Whimsicott can pretty much just guarantee to get at least 2 attacks off on this Serena. We do actually outspeed the Serena under Trick Room, which I'm thankful for. And that's actually just going to take care of the Serena right then and there, which feels amazing. So their final mon in the back is going to be that Gallade, which we know is definitely not Mega. Probably just Choice Scarf, if I'm going to be honest. But since we have the ability to just go ahead and double up into it with a Moonblast, with a full power single target Hyper Voice, that should be able to do it. Unfortunately, they're actually just they just time themselves out because they realize they probably just walked away. Regardless though, super fun game there. Honestly, interesting that it didn't necessarily really go my way early, but we still found a way. And just the fact that that Unseen Fist hit into the freaking Spiky Boy was just enough to put it in range to clean up the game essentially. So also quick shout out to my horrible placement because of the fact that I actually was messing around with a team. I end up building too many crazy gimmick teams and then go on loss streaks to where they don't work at all. And then I completely ruin my rank, but we're on a 7-win streak. Moral of the story is do not bring the craziest things you can imagine to these ranked matches. They will cook you. They'll cook you in the chat. I'm not gonna lie. I was working with like an anger point camera up. And yeah, now I'm suffering the consequences from that, but it's fine. See you later.